My younger sister seems to have been reborn as well. In her previous life, she was madly in love with the Golden Circle's prince, Ethan Reed. Their relationship was intense, filled with skipping classes, fights, and reckless racing. In the end, she died for him on a stormy night, and he blamed it all on me. Now, in this life, she suggested to our parents that I transfer to the bottom-ranking class where Ethan studies. Her words were clear. Sister, this time it's your turn to be bullied by him and have a twisted love story with him. I laughed. People may be reborn, but their brains don't necessarily reset. Even if Ethan lived 100 lives, he would never be worthy of being my opponent. In my previous life, I was lured back home by my adoptive parents, Margaret and Robert Lane. Under the guise of family obligations, they beat me to death with a bat. The image of their greedy faces fighting over inheritance stayed with me until my last breath. I had always been a nuisance to them. Once they were done using me, what purpose did I have in their eyes? My head was struck hard. The world went blurry. And then I opened my eyes to find myself in a familiar room bathed in sunlight. In front of me sat my adoptive mother Margaret and my younger sister Emily Lane. Margaret's anxious voice rang out. Emily, what's going on? Your teacher called saying you applied to transfer classes, into the bottom-ranked class. Cross from me, Emily hesitated before replying. Transfer classes? Oh, right. She blinked as if suddenly realizing something, then turned to Margaret and pointed at me. Mom, the teacher must have made a mistake. I was suggesting that my sister transfer classes. There are so many underachievers in class 13. And she's always so helpful that she'd surely love to assist them. In our previous life, Emily fell for Ethan Reed at first sight and begged to transfer to class 13 just 2 months into the school year. Margaret, always indulgent of her, readily agreed. This led to 7 years of entanglement between her and Ethan, culminating in her tragic death after a drunk driving incident during a storm. As for me, I had barely any interaction with Ethan in that life. We exchanged a few words during occasional encounters after graduation, but Emily saw me as a constant threat. She was convinced that their on and off relationship was because I, as his ideal, lingered in his heart. Now, seeing the hostility in her eyes as she glanced at me, I realized, Emily has been reborn too. When she proposed the idea to Margaret, there was no room for discussion. Emily is right, Margaret said. I'll arrange for your transfer tomorrow. Although the Lanes had taken me in due to my father's past kindness, I had always been treated as nothing more than a servant for Emily, never as their daughter. In our past life, Emily begged to transfer, and Margaret originally wanted me to follow her for supervision, but Emily insisted I stay behind, and Margaret relented. Later, Emily even gloated to me. Don't think I don't know. Ethan skipped class to watch your violin competition. You really thought I'd let you spend more time with him? Her smug face didn't warrant a response. Ethan at my competition? A joke. The boy probably couldn't even tell how many strings were on a violin. That rumor had been something I subtly spread myself to avoid being dragged into their mess. But now that things have changed, I'm more than willing to play a new game with her. That night, Emily slipped into my room, silent as a shadow. In this household, my room couldn't be locked because I wasn't allowed any privacy. She stood beside my bed, her cold, venomous gaze scanning me inch by inch. And suddenly, she smiled. Sister, this time it's your turn to be bullied by him, to have a twisted love story. The next morning, I carried my bag to class 13. The moment I stepped into the classroom, a book flew straight at me. I tilted my head slightly to dodge it. A lazy voice called out, "Who said you could dodge?" Ethan Reed lounged in his chair, legs crossed on the desk, a smug look on his face. Fine, I'll give you another chance. Pick up the book, hand it to me properly, and let me throw it again. I'll let you off for now. I bent down, picked up the book, and walked toward him. Around him stood a few of his lackeys, their gazes filled with disdain and malice. I smiled sweetly. Like this? I asked as I slammed the book's hardest corner directly into his nose. Ack! Ethan jumped out of his chair, clutching his nose as blood streamed down. He sneered at me, his expression dark. You little witch. How dare you touch me? You're dead. His lackeys closed in threateningly. But just then, the teacher walked in. Class, Meet your new transfer student, Anna Lane. She ranked second in the entrance exam. So let's all learn from her. Ethan sneered. Don't worry, teacher. We'll make sure to get along with Anna. His bullying tactics were nothing creative, thumbtacks on my chair. Dead snakes and rats in my drawer. I calmly removed the thumbtacks and threw the animals back at him, scaring him pale. Realizing these tricks didn't faze me, he turned to direct violence. One afternoon, I found a note in my math book. They're taking you to the equipment room. I stared at it for a moment before crumpling it and throwing it away. Who could have written it? Despite their reputation as troublemakers, not everyone in Class 13 was bad. Most were ordinary students crushed under the dominance of Ethan's gang. I glanced around the sparse classroom. A girl named Sarah Walker quickly avoided my gaze, confirming my suspicion. She hesitated before calling out, Anna, let's walk home together. Her courage wavered, but I shook my head with a smile. Don't get involved. As I left, Ethan and his lackeys cornered me in the equipment room. Standing beside him was Emily. Ethan sneered. So this is the sister who bosses you around at home? Emily replied coolly. But you shouldn't bully her like this. I refused to become someone like him. Emily's posture was defiant and proud, completely different from the girl in her past life who had cried and begged Ethan Reed not to break up with her. Now, Reborn. She understood this much. The less attention you paid to Ethan, the more he liked you. Sure enough, Ethan's expression softened, showing faint sympathy. Emily took a deep breath and pretended to offer advice. Besides, my sister has studied violin for so many years. Her hands are her most valuable asset. And the more precious something is, the more satisfying it is when it's destroyed. Isn't it? Ethan sneered and waved at the two people restraining me. Do it here. Break her fingers one by one. I'll make sure she can never play the violin again. Hearing this, Emily's gaze landed on me, filled with barely concealed delight. They shoved me roughly toward the uneven bars and picked up a heavy dumbbell from the ground, ready to smash it down. Just as they were about to swing, I suddenly spoke. Idiots. What did you say? Ethan froze, narrowing his eyes. I smiled at him. If I were you, I wouldn't do something this stupid at such a critical moment for your family's stock distribution. His pupils constricted. In my mind, I silently counted down. 3, 2, 1. The door to the equipment room burst open with a loud crash. But the people standing at the door weren't the ones I had arranged. Turning my head, I was shocked to see several girls from the class. I had thought that Sarah Walker's timid question in the classroom earlier had been the most she could muster. But I was wrong. Sarah steadied herself by holding onto another girl's arm, raising an old, battered flip phone in her trembling hand. She said in a shaky yet resolute voice, I've already called the police. A dead silence filled the room for a few seconds before Ethan burst into laughter. Sarah Walker, right? Looks like the lesson I gave you before wasn't enough. Now you dare stand up for justice? Call the police? Do you even know who I am? Do you think the police can touch me? His cold, mocking gaze turned Sarah's face pale. But before he could intimidate her further, a commanding female voice rang out from the hallway. If the police can't deal with you, perhaps I can. A woman in a dark blue silk dress strode in on high heels. Her sharp gaze swept the room. Ethan Reed. Haven't I told you not to cause trouble during this critical period for our family? Do you understand the mess you're creating? Ethan's arrogance vanished instantly. Sis. Jillian Reed crossed her arms, her expression cold. Let her go and go home. But, sis. He's the one who. I don't care who started it. When you do something, you need to choose the right time and method. Just because I'm stopping you now doesn't mean I'll always stop you in the future. Jillian had come because of the anonymous letter I sent. Over the past month, the Reed family had been in chaos over the division of shares after their patriarch's death. In such a volatile situation, even the smallest scandal could be weaponized. Jillian wouldn't let Ethan jeopardize their position, though she clearly resented being manipulated by me. Before leaving, she glanced at me with a look that was almost dismissive, as though I were no more than an ant by the roadside. Her gaze carried an unspoken warning. Once the Reed family's turmoil settled, Ethan would be free to deal with me however he wanted. I met her gaze and mouthed silently, looking forward to it. Beside her, Emily stared at me for a long moment before suddenly smirking. Jillian Reed actually showed up for this. I get it now that you've come back. Too. Her expression was triumphant and taunting. But what's the point? Right now, I'm the one who's Ethan's ideal. And you're the one being bullied. Once the Reed family's internal issues are resolved, I'll enjoy watching what happens to you. After Emily left with her head held high, the equipment room was silent except for me and Sarah, along with the other girls. Anna Lane. Since you're okay, we'll leave now, Sarah said hesitantly, clutching her battered phone and forcing a weak smile. Wait. I called after her. The midterm exam sheets came back today. Are there any questions you don't understand? Sarah froze mid-step and stared at me in disbelief. Not just you, I added, smiling as I put a hand on her shoulder. Anyone in class 13 with questions can come ask me. We're all part of the same team. We should stick together and improve as a group. Don't you think? In this era, the chance for someone from a poor background to rise to the top is 1 in a million. More often than not, people like Sarah and her friends are ordinary individuals struggling to make ends meet, while enduring the oppression of people like Ethan Reed. But why should it be that way? I pressed down the gym equipment and met their wide-eyed gazes, which now held a flicker of hope, like sparks in the darkness. I said slowly and clearly, this world belongs to ordinary people like us. The next day, Ethan didn't come to school. I knew the Reed family feud had reached a boiling point, leaving him no time to waste on petty bullying. This naturally put me in charge of Class 13 self-study sessions. The hours that Ethan and his cronies once dominated with chaos were now my time to tutor everyone. In both my past and present lives, I had always devoted myself to learning with everything I had. I stayed up late at night organizing key practice problems, printing them out, and distributing them to the class. They threw themselves into solving the problems with everything they had. Whenever they encountered something they didn't understand, they noted it down and brought it to me the next day for clarification. During this time, Ethan Reed's unmotivated lackeys tried to stir up trouble. They smeared paint over the notes I wrote on the board and then looked at me provocatively. Don't think that just because Ethan isn't here, you can do whatever you want. When he's back, that'll be the day you're finished. I shot them a cold glare. Sarah Walker's seatmate, a girl named Lisa Zhao, silently shut both the front and back doors of the classroom. Everyone else stood up and began surrounding the troublemakers step by step. It seems like you still don't understand the situation, I said, raising the water bottle in my hand. Then I slammed it into the face of one of Ethan's lackeys at the back. Before the day Ethan comes back to deal with me, maybe your day of reckoning will come first. When the second monthly exam results were released, the entire school was in an uproar. Class 13, which had always been the lowest performing class, had shot up to third place in average scores. Even more surprising, 2 students from our class ranked in the top 10 for the entire grade. The school leadership quickly caught wind of this and visited our classroom to investigate. Sarah Walker spoke up. This is all thanks to our class representative, Anna Lane. She's been tutoring all of us privately. Anna Lane? The adopted daughter of the Lanes? I remember she was ranked second in the entrance exams, right? And now she's placed first this time. Who transferred her into Class 13? The school officials exchanged glances, clearly remembering me. Where is Anna Lane now? They asked Sarah. That same day happened to mark the end of the Reed family's internal conflict. And Ethan Reed returned to school. Predictably, he and his lackeys ambushed me on my way to school. In the dim alleyway outside the campus gate, Ethan kicked over a trash can and sneered. Anna Lane, didn't I tell you? The day I came back would be the day you'd regret everything. Emily Lane stood off to the side, offering half-hearted advice. Don't go too far. It'll be hard to clean up if things get out of hand. Don't worry, Ethan replied with a cold laugh. This time, my sister won't come to save her. He and his lackeys closed in on me, grabbing my wrist and attempting to smash my hand against the rough wall. Just then, the school administrators arrived with Sarah Walker in tow and witnessed the scene. The vice principal's stern voice rang out. What's going on here during school hours? Startled, Ethan's lackeys instinctively released my hand. Before Ethan could speak, I cut him off. Teacher, they said they were going to break my hand. In the large conference room of the administrative building, Ethan Reed and his lackeys stood lazily, exuding an air of entitlement. The principal cleared his throat and began. We've reviewed the situation. It's clear that Ethan and his group were in the wrong. Thankfully, no serious harm was caused. Let's all take a step back and consider this matter resolved. The principal's attempt to downplay the incident was obvious. I smiled faintly. Is that so? Then I'd like Ethan Reed to apologize to me. That's not asking too much. Is it? Apologize to you? Ethan sneered as if I'd told him a ridiculous joke. You think you deserve that? I remained calm. Well, since there's surveillance footage, let's involve the police. The tension in the room thickened as neither of us backed down. On one side was the so-called golden boy of a wealthy, powerful family. On the other was the top-ranked student who had led her entire class to academic improvement. If this incident escalated to the police, the school's reputation would be at stake. Caught between a rock and a hard place, the principal had a teacher pull me aside. Anna Lane, we understand you're upset, and we acknowledge the school's failure to intervene earlier. To make up for it, the school will award you this year's special scholarship. We'll also take steps to ensure no one in Class 13 is mistreated again. Will that suffice? I couldn't help but laugh. So the school does know how difficult things have been for Class 13? The teacher's expression turned awkward as I watched them stammer for a response. Fine, I said. But I have one condition. Use the scholarship money as a reward for the students of Class 13, who've made significant progress, everyone except Ethan Reed and his cronies. The school acted swiftly. In no time, they issued scholarships to Class 13 under the guise of recognizing collective progress. When news of the awards reached the classroom, Sarah and Lisa were visibly emotional. I don't want this money, Sarah said, her eyes red. He should have apologized to you. If we'd been a moment late. Your hand. Lisa trailed off, her voice trembling. I interrupted. The timing of the exam results and honor roll announcements was no coincidence. Planned it all. And even if you hadn't arrived, they wouldn't have done much to me. People like Ethan fear losing everything. That's their real weakness. Lisa, who had ranked in the top 10 alongside me, silently handed me the scholarship card. I pushed it back to her. I don't need it. Writing course design codes for a few college students earns me more than enough. Don't let this weigh on your conscience. A shallow apology from him is meaningless. Only tangible benefits matter. With less than 6 months until the college entrance exams, financial support like this could help these girls focus entirely on their studies. In my past life, I remembered that when the exam results came out, barely any students from Class 13 qualified for university. Many became mere props in the chaotic drama of Emily and Ethan's toxic relationship. 2 girls had even ended up hospitalized after Ethan attacked them during an argument with Emily, missing their chance to take the exams. I couldn't help but think that maybe my rebirth wasn't just about avenging my death, but about changing the fate of as many people as I could. But now, Ethan Reed must hate you even more, Lisa said, clutching her scholarship card. And your sister. She's clearly been involved in every major incident so far. I nodded. They won't give up so easily. That evening, I smiled and ruffled Sarah's messy short hair. Leave this to me. All you need to do is study hard. That day in the equipment room, you all saved me. Now, I want to save you. That night, I had a rare dream about my past life. After the college entrance exams, I moved out of the Lane household. I spent most of my days buried in the lab or library, seldom returning. During my second year of graduate school, I accompanied my mentor to an academic exchange event and ran into Ethan Reed. He greeted me under the guise of being a former high school classmate, while I, seeking project sponsorship, discussed the development prospects of my current project with him. The very next day, Emily Lane came crying and screaming to find me, her face twisted with hatred as she spat. You witch. How dare you be the white moonlight he can't forget? It's just your face, isn't it? Who knows what tricks you pulled to get into research? Maybe even your mentor slept with you. I bit into my sandwich without changing my expression and raised my hand. Security. 2 guards promptly arrived. This woman seems to have some mental issues. Please handle it. Emily sobbed and cursed as she was dragged away. Later that day, my adoptive mother, Margaret, called me over 10 times. I didn't pick up even once. I informed my senior colleague, then moved into the research institute, where I stayed immersed in the lab. It wasn't until the project temporarily concluded that I heard Emily had met with misfortune. Margaret had lured me back under the pretense of a family banquet in Emily's memory. Together with Robert. She had killed me. I woke with a start. Moonlight flooding the room in a silver glow. The pain of the bat cracking against my skull seemed to linger in my body. I stared at the crescent moon outside for a while, then curled my lips into a faint smile. There won't be a next time. After the school's intervention, Ethan Reed no longer dared to openly bully other students. Meanwhile, he grew closer to Emily Lane, who seemed to have perfected her act, manipulating him completely. I didn't know what lies she fed him, but Ethan's gaze toward me grew darker and more malicious by the day. He stopped targeting other classmates, channeling all his hatred toward me instead. Soon, it was time for the college entrance exams. Because of the way household registrations were managed, Emily and I weren't assigned to the same testing center. Early that morning, Emily whined and insisted that Margaret and Robert escort her to the exam. This is my first time taking such an important test. I'm nervous and want Mom and Dad to come with me, she said, holding a glass of milk with an innocent smile. Besides, my sister's testing center isn't far. She's always been independent, she can go by herself. I left the house as the first golden rays of sunlight pierced through the clouds, turning onto a quiet path. The sky suddenly darkened, and the roar of an engine grew louder. A bright red sports car screeched to a halt in front of me. Ethan Reed stepped out with one of his lackeys, smiling as he approached. Third time's the charm. Huh, I caught you again, he said. You've repaid Emily's kindness with nothing but cruelty all these years. Did you really think you'd make it to the exam in one piece? I tightened my grip on my bag straps, my face devoid of emotion. Ethan Reed, isn't today your exam day too? He threw his head back and laughed. An exam? Me? You think I need an exam to change my fate? I was born at a height you can't even dream of reaching. I don't need to take a test to get into the best schools. Do you think I'm like you? His laughter faded into a sneer. You're good at schemes, aren't you? Let's see who you can call for help now. Oh, wait, you're out of tricks. Everyone else is busy with their exams. No one's coming to save you. A sudden sharp pain shot through my abdomen. Stunned for a moment, I realized he had kicked me hard. I collapsed to the ground, struggling to sit up and brace myself against a wall. Before I could rise, Ethan loomed over me, his expression contemptuous. I've had enough of you, you lowly dog. He spat. Who gave you permission to resist me? This time, I'll do it myself. I'll break your fingers one by one. He bent down, reaching for my wrist, but I moved quickly, grabbing a handful of his hair and slamming his head against the wall behind us. Ah! Ethan screamed in agony. One of his lackeys rushed over, shoving my shoulder hard against the wall. The impact sent a sharp crack through my body as pain radiated from my left shoulder. I could almost hear the bone fracture, but I gritted my teeth and pressed my forearm against the rough wall, dragging it along until my skin tore. Blood dripped onto my white dress, staining it in jagged streaks. Ethan, who had just regained his footing, froze at the sight. What are you doing? I steadied myself, cradling my injured arm, smearing the blood even further across the fabric. I let out a soft, pained laugh. Young master, you've spent 3 years bullying classmates, never studying a day. And yet, here I am teaching you something from your textbooks. A man's wrath spills blood within 5 paces. Yet the world will carry on. I looked him in the eye, my voice steady. I thought maybe you were smart enough not to act today. But I see now that you're as stupid as Emily. The heat of the wind whipped against my open wounds, amplifying the pain, but it made me smile wider. Born at the top? How long can you guarantee you'll stay there? As my words hung in the air, 2 reporters carrying cameras appeared at the entrance of the path. The flashes of their cameras illuminated everything. The broken security cameras I had tampered with earlier, my blood-streaked dress, my mangled arm, and the tears spilling from my red-rimmed eyes. What's going on here? Ethan finally realized what was happening. His face paled as it dawned on him that he had walked straight into my trap. I'm part of the Reed family, here to settle some personal grievances, Ethan said coldly. If you want to keep your job, then get lost. Hearing his words, the two reporters lowered their cameras. Ethan smirked, thinking his threat had worked. But in the next moment, they stepped closer instead. Young master, there are always people in this world who aren't afraid of you. You've been coddled in your high position for so long that you've forgotten that. One of the female reporters said, carefully avoiding my injured left arm. She grabbed my other hand. Let's go. I got into the car of the two reporters I had contacted in advance, and we sped off. Ethan's car chased us relentlessly, tailing us closely. Time was tight. By the time we reached the exam center, most of the students had already entered the testing halls. Outside the gates, parents crowded together, seeing their children off, along with several journalists who were there to capture moments of the day. The car screeched to a halt in front of the crowd, drawing all eyes to us. I pushed the door open and stumbled out, my body covered in blood. Ethan Reed, I said slowly and clearly, staring at the red sports car behind us. Even if you're part of the Reed family, even if you're the so-called Golden Prince, what right do you have to stop me from taking this exam? Break my arm? Leave me with only one breath? I'll still crawl into that exam hall and turn in my test. Or you can just kill me here. Ethan stormed out of his car, gripping the edge of the doorframe as he glared at me, equal parts furious and astonished. In his eyes, I caught my reflection, disheveled hair, wounds covering my body, and a bloodied, tattered dress that flared out behind me like a banner in the wind. What's wrong? Afraid. I smirked, my gaze moving past him to the two police cars speeding toward us. Then I looked back at Ethan and flashed him a taunting smile. Well then, I'll be heading in to take my test. In the sweltering heat of June, I found myself sitting in a stuffy exam hall with no air conditioning. Sweat seeped into the wounds on my arm, the sting keeping my mind sharp and clear. After the first two exams of the day, I went to the hospital to have my injuries treated. Sarah Walker accompanied me, normally timid and soft-spoken. This time she didn't shed a single tear. Will it leave a scar? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I glanced down at my arm as the doctor carefully used tweezers to remove grains of dirt from my wound. Maybe, but it won't matter. It's just a surface wound. It looks worse than it is, I said with a faint smile. Besides, if Ethan wanted to make a scene, he should have been prepared to pay a price. After my injuries were treated, I didn't return to the Lane household that night. Instead, I stayed in a small inn near the exam center. This exam, in both my past and present lives, was never particularly difficult for me. More importantly, I carried with me the complete knowledge and achievements of my past life, the research I had done, the skills I had mastered. These were treasures that Emily Lane, no matter how many lifetimes she relived, could never possess. When the final exam ended, I went straight back to the hospital. Lying in the hospital bed, I pulled out my phone and wasn't surprised to see my name trending online. Top-ranked student almost misses college exam. Ethan Reed from Reed family. Anna Lane heroic stand. Photos of me. Bloodied, defiant, and confronting Ethan outside the exam center. Were all over the internet. Oh my God. She still went to take the exam despite her injuries? She's the top student in her grade. She's been bullied by Ethan Reed for 3 years. If she couldn't take the exam, all her hard work would have been wasted. Someone needs to investigate the Reed family. They think they're above the law. I turned off my phone and looked at the two people sitting by my bedside. Sarah was quietly peeling an apple with a small knife, while Lisa Zhao sat across from me. Everyone wanted to come see you, Lisa said, but they were worried about disturbing your recovery. So Sarah and I came instead. I'm fine. Nothing serious. I'll be discharged tomorrow. I shifted slightly, feeling the weight of the cast on my left arm and shoulder. I smiled at them. How did you do on the exam? Confident you'll beat me. Who wants to beat you? Lisa replied calmly. Then, after a pause, she asked, how were you so sure those two reporters would help you? It wasn't a surprising question coming from Lisa, who was the quietest yet most perceptive person in our class. That day, when Ethan and I raced to the exam center, every parent and journalist saw the chase. Yet only a handful of reporters dared to cover the story. Most wouldn't risk offending the powerful Reed family for someone like me, who arrived at the exam covered in blood and might not even finish the test. But those two young, fearless female reporters were different. Brave people are always brave. And just people are always just. In my past life, a major scandal broke out at a neighboring school. A professor had fabricated research for years, embezzling over 100 million in research funds. His students, more than 30 in total, jointly filed a complaint that exposed him. Leading the charge were two young, courageous female reporters, Su Nan and Lu Yan. When I contacted them this time, they were still interns. After I explained my plan to escalate the situation, they were confused. If you already know what Ethan is planning, why not avoid the danger? Why put yourself at risk? Su Nan asked over the phone, her tone full of puzzlement. Because I don't want to just avoid him this one time, I replied. I glanced down at the butterfly knife in my hand, its blade glinting faintly after I finished cleaning it. A small smile played on my lips. Ethan hadn't only bullied me or my class, his cruelty extended far beyond that. If I was going to make a stand, I wanted it to be a loud one. The public outcry raged for over half a month. By the time the college entrance exam results were released, it reached a fever pitch. I had scored 20 points higher than in my previous life, earning the title of provincial top scorer. My value skyrocketed, forcing the Reed family to send someone with real influence to negotiate with me. My adoptive parents called repeatedly, demanding that I return to the Lane household. When I pushed the door open and saw Jillian Reed sitting there, I couldn't help but laugh. Miss Reed, I told you we'd meet again. Her sharp eyes flickered with irritation before her composed demeanor returned. Anna Lane, state your conditions. Conditions? What conditions? I feigned ignorance. But my adoptive father slammed the table in frustration. Stop playing dumb. Anna, take what you're offered and be done with it. It wasn't hard to guess that the Lanes had long since struck some sort of deal with the Reeds. My adoptive mother gave me a cold glare. You've been with us since you were 10. We raised you for so many years. And now you're repaying us like this. I let out a laugh, unable to hold back. You took me in because my father, a distant relative of yours, died saving your family. You didn't want the disgrace of being seen as ungrateful, so you adopted me. My father's life bought me 8 years of servitude in your home, and now you're trying to say I owe you. I lost patience and stood up, walking to my room to pack my documents and wallet. As I turned to leave, Jillian remained seated, her gaze filled with unveiled contempt. It was the kind of hatred that comes from someone in power being defied by someone beneath them. Smiling faintly, I said, Miss Reed, I imagine you already guessed before coming here that I wouldn't agree to a reconciliation. She rose, towering over me in her high heels, her aura imposing, looking down at me. Her lips curled into a frosty smile. Do you really believe that nonsense about the wrath of a commoner spilling blood in 5 paces? Do you understand the consequences of offending the Reed family? In the end, the matter concluded with the Reed family paying a significant price to suppress public opinion. To avoid further scrutiny, Ethan Reed was sent abroad for his studies, and I returned to school with all of Class 13 to accept the recognition we had earned. For the first time in history, every single student in Class 13 passed the college entrance exams. Lisa Zhao even scored 692, earning her a spot in one of the nation's top universities. The principal, red-faced with excitement, shook my hand vigorously, promising me a generous scholarship. I smiled. Principal, I assume you're aware of what happened outside the exam center. He froze, awkwardly clearing his throat. Instead of a scholarship, I continued, I'd prefer if the school committed to fair handling of issues and stricter management. At the very least, ensure that there's never another Ethan Reed who treats human lives like dirt. He nodded stiffly, offering hollow assurances. Still, I knew the Education Bureau had already begun investigating previous bullying incidents. For the next few years at least, our school would be a fairer and more just place. As I left the school, I ran into Emily Lane. Her eyes burned with an even deeper hatred than in my past life. Anna Lane, how dare you? She spat, trembling with rage. Do you think you can turn the world upside down just because you got a second chance? Offending the Reed family, you'll never know how you'll die someday. That's not your concern, I said with a calm smile that didn't reach my eyes. Or you could test the Reeds yourself and see what it'll cost to kill me. By September, I had enrolled in Tsinghua University's optoelectronics department. The residual heat of the public uproar surrounding the Reed family kept me temporarily safe and allowed me to quickly reconnect with my past life's mentor, Professor Tan. At our first meeting, I said, "Professor Tan, I'd like you to guide me for this year's World University Programming competition." He studied me for a long moment, his gaze softening behind his glasses. "You're the one who stood up to the Reeds, aren't you?" After I won the competition's gold medal without contest, I waited until we were alone to hand over my research on advanced microchips. Work that was years ahead of its time. In his quiet office, Professor Tan examined the data, his eyes sharp and questioning. "This project is classified, and you're just a first-year student. Explain yourself." "Anna." I smiled lightly. "You can think of me as exceptionally talented, or as someone who didn't drink the soup of forgetfulness before reincarnating. Verify the data and results as you wish. Investigate my background if you must. I'm simply doing everything I can because, in an era where technology advances at lightning speed, every year saved on development counts. You know better than I do how much it matters for a country to lead in any given field." I had anticipated Professor Tan's cautious nature. I knew he would investigate thoroughly, so I waited patiently. About a week later, he invited me to his home. The first question he asked echoed one Lisa Zhao had posed to me in the hospital. "How did you know those two reporters would help you?" His version, however, carried a subtle difference. "You didn't contact anyone else, did you? You went straight to them. That means you were certain from the beginning how they'd act. You didn't even go out of your way to find their contact information." Sitting in his dimly lit study, I met his gaze with calm composure. "When I was very young, my mother passed away. After my father died, I was taken in by the Lanes. For a long time, I didn't know what it was like to receive love or support from elders. Until I met my mentor in my past life. I remember working late in the lab for 3 days straight, my eyes bloodshot as I prepared a paper for publication. During a team dinner, I was mentally calculating data when my mentor suddenly tapped my head with his chopsticks. "If you're this distracted while eating, anyone would think I'm overworking you." I snapped back to reality as he tugged playfully at my cheek. "Smile more, won't you? You're so young, yet you seem even gloomier than me. An old lady." In this lifetime, Professor Tan regarded me for a long time before he spoke again. "When I'm not working on research, I occasionally read novels. Stories about time travel and reincarnation, though far-fetched, that can be surprisingly entertaining." I blinked at him. "Really? I don't read them much." He continued. "I'll arrange for someone to verify the data and organize the project's progress accordingly. As for you, once your foundational courses are complete, I'll request permission for you to join my lab early. If you have any other difficulties, feel free to let me know." Hearing this, my exhaustion seemed to vanish. I stepped forward and shook his hand earnestly. "Professor, truly, thank you." With Professor Tan's support, I quickly sold several large algorithm-based software programs I had developed, accumulating significant funds while gaining a much broader network of contacts. One company even sent me an invitation to a business gala, hoping to find some worthwhile opportunities. I attended, only to run into Emily Lane. She wore a snow-white gown adorned with a pearl necklace, trailing gracefully behind Jillian Reed. Together, they basked in the spotlight, surrounded by admiration. In my previous life, Emily's relationship with Ethan Reed had been staunchly opposed by the Reed family. Jillian, in particular, had publicly expressed disdain, declaring the Reeds would never accept someone from such a lowly background. But this time, it seemed Emily had successfully integrated into their family. I let out a derisive laugh, handed my business card to a potential contact, and turned to leave. But Emily called out to me, "Anna Lane." I stopped and turned, surprised to see she had left Jillian's side and was now standing before me, holding a wine glass and wearing an innocent expression. "Why hold grudges between sisters?" she said sweetly. "Instead of running around pitching your little projects, why not come to me for help? What would I ask you for?" I replied. Emily laughed triumphantly. "I'm now Ethan Reed's fiancée, officially recognized by the Reeds. What do you think you should ask me for?" Her eyes sparkled with barely contained pride, and I understood immediately. She had sought me out solely to gloat. In this lifetime, She had finally achieved her dream of being accepted by the Reeds. She was so ridiculous that I didn't even want to waste another word. Turning away, I walked off. Behind me, she shouted angrily, "You think you can stay smug forever? The storm from before is long over. Once Ethan returns, no one will protect you. Anna Lane, I'll enjoy watching you die." I met Ethan Reed again 3 years later at an industry conference I attended with Lisa Zhao. The chaos surrounding the college entrance exams had long passed. As Lisa and I wandered the vast exhibition hall, sunlight filtered through the skylights above. Turning to me, Lisa said, "Sarah called this morning. Her interview went well, and she starts her internship next week. Everyone's so grateful for how you tutored us that year, helping us all pass the college entrance exam. And now, you're even using your connections to secure internships for us." He paused, watching me as I adjusted a robotic arm. His voice dropped. "Sometimes, feels like a dream. That night, I dreamed it wasn't you who transferred into class 13.it was your sister." She didn't resist Ethan Reed's bullying. Instead, she fell in love with him. Before the college entrance exams, they had a fight. I turned away silently, patting his hand to stop him from continuing. "Try the adjustments I made," I said. Lisa fell silent, focusing on the robotic arm and smoothly typing a string of code into a nearby console. "Don't dwell on it," I said softly. "You said it yourself. That was just a dream. This is reality. Besides, I didn't pull strings for free. I expect you all to help me with something. Tell everyone this is a fair trade, not something you owe me." Lisa stared at me, his expression conflicted, though usually reserved. He seemed unable to find the words he wanted to say. Just as I was about to tell him it was time to leave, a voice called out behind me, "Anna Lane." I froze, then turned to see Ethan Reed standing not far away, his sharp gaze locking onto mine. After 3 years abroad, he seemed more composed, his malice carefully concealed. He greeted me with a faint smile. "Long time no see." "Well, if it isn't Ethan Reed." I smiled back. 3 years and you're still alive? I thought you died in a shootout by now." His expression didn't falter, though the sharpness in his eyes deepened. "You should be glad this is just within our country. Otherwise, I could have killed you and called it self-defense." It seemed he thought his words carried a weighty threat. Just then, the robotic arm beside me turned counterclockwise and smacked the back of his head. "What are you doing?" Ethan snapped, glaring murderously at Lisa Zhao, who stood calmly at the controls. "Oops. Slipped. Misoperation," Lisa said coolly, adjusting the arm back into position. Ethan Reed was not one to keep his temper in check for long, and I didn't have to wait long for him to make a move. That afternoon, accusations suddenly surfaced online, claiming that Professor Tan and I had fabricated academic results. The claims argued that, as an undergraduate, it was impossible for me to have developed such advanced chips or published 3 consecutive papers in top journals. Old controversies were dragged up again. The confrontation outside the exam center was reframed, with people suggesting I had staged it to build a persona for myself. After all, how could a supposedly bullied student still manage to take the exam and score the top spot in the province? Theories swirled. If I were just an ordinary person, how could I thrive after offending the Reeds? Rumors flew that I had won the gold medal at the World Hardware Design Competition soon after enrolling at university, something no ordinary student could achieve. Suspicion fell on Professor Tan as well. Manipulating public opinion was the Reed family's specialty. 3 years ago, I had seized the upper hand, catching them off guard. This time, they clearly intended to eliminate me for good, ensuring I would never rise again. Everything my mentor and I had worked on came to a sudden halt. Our projects were suspended, and the university placed us under investigation. The accusations had grown too loud to ignore, and the school deemed the investigation a standard procedure. As they took me away, my mentor reassured me calmly, "Don't worry, the innocent have nothing to fear." I asked him, "Professor, do you believe me?" Bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, he regarded me quietly and said, "When you stretch out the timeline of an event, when every key moment from the past is magnified, you begin to see interesting patterns. It's like chess. Each move may not reveal its purpose right away, but much later, when everything connects, you realize that what seemed simple had layers of meaning." I tapped my chin thoughtfully and smiled. Exactly. What's unfolding now is more than it seems. Over the next 2 weeks, I did nothing to fight back. I let the rumors spread and even deliberately left some gaps in my defenses, allowing the Reed family to believe there might be truth to the allegations about my research and publications. Like predators scenting blood, they attacked with renewed ferocity. Even Emily Lane joined in, tearfully denouncing me in front of the media. She accused me of being ungrateful after years of being raised by the Lane family, and claimed I had bullied her relentlessly as her older sister. The controversy raged, escalating to the point where the entire nation demanded answers. That's when I held a press conference streamed live across the internet. The interviewers were Sue Nan and Lu Yen, the same fearless reporters I had worked with before. With their cameras trained on me, I opened the file in my hands. These, I began, are records of the course designs I created for college students when I was in high school. Here is a comprehensive breakdown of the development process for the TW2108 chip. This, I said, holding up another stack of papers, is every draft of my research. First, second, mid-stage, and all corresponding experimental data. As for the incident outside the exam hall years ago, let me show you this video. The footage played on a large projection screen. Every detail was magnified. The vandalized surveillance camera at the street corner, my bloody dress, my mangled arm, my tear-streaked face, and Ethan Reed's menacing expression as he snarled, "I'm from the Reed family. I'm here to settle a personal score. If you want to keep working in this industry, get lost." The screen went black with a sharp crack. I steadied myself, turned back to the camera, and continued. The Reeds have hated me for years. They wanted me to disappear like the countless others they've bullied and crushed. But I refused to let that happen. Why should their campus bullying go unpunished? Why should their lies and slander be taken as truth? This world doesn't belong to the Reeds. It belongs to all of us. Justice will prevail. I paused, then said firmly, I am formally reporting the Reed family for intentional homicide, unethical business practices, and market monopoly. The screen changed, displaying photographs of contracts bearing the Reed family's official seal, along with secretly taken images of their lavish dealings. The photos revealed Ethan Reed and Jillian Reed meeting with powerful figures both domestically and abroad. Before I could present all the evidence, the live stream was abruptly cut off. But I knew the information I had shared would spread across the vast internet like wildfire. Later, sitting in a dimly lit room with Sue Nan, I felt the heat of the studio lights on my face, rubbing my cheeks. I let out a soft laugh. I told you, I said. I'm not here to just avoid them this one time. If we're going to fight, let's fight big. Back then, the Reeds' internal conflict was about much more than just shares. The stakes were massive, and no mistakes could be afforded. That's why Jillian Reed had personally intervened to stop Ethan's reckless actions after the equipment room incident. Afterward, Jillian had taken Ethan to a private luxury suite to secure a deal that would shape the Reeds' future. With the support of those allies, they emerged victorious in the family's power struggle. Later, the college entrance exam scandal gave Jillian an excuse to send Ethan abroad under the guise of laying low. In reality, it allowed them to build stronger connections for future collaborations. Now that Ethan was back, everything was in place. Their plan was simple: ruin me, take over my projects, and hand the results to their prearranged partners. When I asked my mentor if he believed me, he had hesitated only briefly before asking, "What do you need me to do?" I handed him a list. 2 lifetimes' worth of experience had given me not only clarity about my adversaries, but also insight into the questions that had haunted me in my previous life. Using the money from selling my software, I infiltrated companies connected to the Reed family, placing my former classmates from Class 13 in internships. Through their work in marketing and business, they managed to gather useful information. Photos, documents, and connections. The Reeds, sensing danger, tried to suppress the growing storm, but they had lit the match themselves. There was no way I'd let them extinguish it. The day Jillian and Ethan Reed were taken in for investigation was a rainy, overcast one. The Lane family, deeply tied to the Reeds through business and even marriage, wasn't spared either. My adoptive parents, who had adored Emily to the point of obsession, took the fall for everything. Knowing they couldn't escape, They claimed full responsibility to protect her, ensuring she walked away with her life. But nothing else. That afternoon, I stepped out of the research institute, umbrella in hand, only to be tackled by a familiar figure. I narrowly dodged and turned to see the face of the person who had rushed at me, Emily Lane. She sat on the rain-soaked ground, glaring up at me with resentment. "How is it fair?" she demanded bitterly. "How is it that you, Anna Lane, became his irreplaceable white moonlight without doing anything? I've worked so hard and become the same for him. But why did you destroy him? Why did you ruin the entire Reed family? Anna Lane, you wretch. Why wasn't it you who died?" A sharp slap echoed as I struck her across the face. Dropping my umbrella, I grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at me. "Because it was never supposed to be me who died," I said slowly and firmly. "Was it me who ruined the Lane family? They brought this upon themselves with their murders, arson, treason, and betrayal of our country. Golden Prince? That outdated title belongs in the graveyard of feudal relics." I leaned closer, staring into her rain-drenched eyes. "Don't you understand yet? Emily, you're a fool. Your vision is too narrow, too short-sighted. Do you realize how much can be achieved in a second lifetime? You can save an entire class's future. You can push critical national technologies 5 years ahead of the world. You can uproot a malignant tumor long before it spreads and prevent devastating losses. If you aim high enough, you can change the world itself. And yet, all you've ever wanted is to be the object of one man's love. That's not just foolish. It's beyond redemption." She stared up at me, stunned, as the rain poured harder, washing over us and blurring the world around us. After a moment, she suddenly burst into uncontrollable sobs. After the Reed siblings were sentenced to death, it was reported that they had desperately sought ways to escape their fate. Remarkably, Ethan Reed managed to find help. On the way to the execution site, he staged a prison break. The police pursued him all the way to the docks, where Ethan was shot over 20 times by the shore. He died on the spot. My adoptive parents, Margaret and Robert Lane, were sentenced to 20 years in prison. When the news broke, Emily Lane committed suicide. Perhaps she saw no way out, no chance of ever recovering her standing. Or maybe she clung to the desperate hope of being reborn again. Who knows? I shut down my computer and walked to the window, washing my hands at the nearby sink. Through the glass, I could see Sarah Walker and Lisa Zhao standing outside the research institute, waving at me with the rest of the Class 13 group. Turning away, I looked at my mentor. "Professor, I'd like to take the evening off. We have a group activity." He raised an eyebrow. "You say that like I never let you join social events. Go ahead. Then, don't be a workaholic cooped up in the lab all the time. You're too young for that." I waved goodbye to him and headed downstairs. The elevator doors opened to reveal the spacious first-floor lobby, bathed in the fiery red glow of the setting sun. The light stretched out, unrestrained, illuminating everything. Ahead of me, my friends were waiting. The path before me was bright, clear, and full of promise.